And so the piece of advice that I gave them and the piece of advice I think I would give anyone has to do with mindset when you're going into the fundraising world is, ground yourself in the good and positive work that you're doing. There really shouldn't be apologies made. Now, there are obviously exceptions for, if you do something wrong, yes, apologize. But in general, I encourage everyone to make no apologies for the work that we're doing if you believe in the end result of the cause that you're supporting.
Welcome to the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast. Whether you are a seasoned professional or a first-time fundraiser, we have the advice you need to take your next step toward major gift mastery. I'm your host, Tom Dauber, President of Abundant Vision Philanthropic Consulting. Well, I'm pleased today to have Maxwell Sealand on the show today. Max is a director of major gifts at a state school, and he's here to talk to us a little bit about his experience in the fundraising profession. Max, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Well, goodness, this is a fundraising show. Everybody knows that, and we'll definitely get into that topic. But before we do, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you live, and how you spend your time when you're not working.
So sure, I currently reside in the wonderful state of Vermont. I've spent what seems like a lifetime bouncing back and forth between New Jersey and Vermont. I've got two young boys that I'm raising when I'm not doing fundraising, and spend my time when I'm not fathering, when I'm not fundraising, trying to stay in shape. I do a little exercise here and there, and then have a penchant for some nerdy things, video game, anime. I like to do the occasional situation when it comes up for a D&D table. So yeah, that's how I spend my time mostly.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, tell me, what are some of your favorite animes?
So my son and I are rewatching. I've watched it, so I kind of have to clear that things are kosher for a kid his age. We're in the midst of finishing up My Hero Academia, and then I wrapped up Attack on Titan a while ago, which was just a roller coaster ride for sure.
Sure. Yeah, my kids, various ones have all been into different anime at various times. So I've certainly done my tour as an anime dad, and even I've done some cosplaying at local cons with my daughter. So that was a fun adventure.
Good for you. That's super exciting.
Oh, that's great. So now what about your professional journey? How did you become a fundraiser?
So, I'd say like most, I didn't set out saying, hey, I'm going to professionally raise funds for what I do when I grow up. But actually, my interest in fundraising started as a volunteer. My wife and I had just graduated from college. We were newly engaged. And like I said, we were living in Vermont, but the goal was to move back to New Jersey to have the wedding around friends and family who lived down there where we both grew up. So, we were going to quit our jobs, move down there. And so I started tapping into, who do I know that might give me a job down there so that I can use connections as opposed to, just going out there cold turkey and trying to, field some ads. And so one of those individuals was a family member who was running their own educational nonprofit. And I reached out to him and he said, oh, you mean like a paying job? No, I don't have any of those. But we have our big fundraising gala coming up. So if you've got spare time, which it sounds like you do, you want to come by, stuff some envelopes, make some phone calls. And I was like, yeah, sure. I can help out in that regard. So that was over the course of a week, sat down with them, was helping out just with my time. And my wife and I ended up taking a cross-country trip before the wedding. And halfway back from California, got a call and they were like, it was my uncle who said, well, our fundraising gala went excellent. And, the board met and they decided we need another events and fundraising person. So do you want to interview? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Nice to have a job lined up for when I got back. So started doing some events-based fundraising, did that for about 2 years. And then the the New England beckoning came again, and I saw a role at a very small liberal arts college in southern Vermont. Happened to be the school that one of my family members had graduated from. So I applied there, became a fundraiser and alumni relations person and communications person and several different, obligations based around the fact that there were only four of us in the whole office. So really small school, really small shop, spent about 3 years there doing a little bit of everything, graduated into an annual fund role back in New Jersey. So bounced back again with a larger school, 10,000 undergrads, was doing annual giving and leadership annual giving solicitations, and then got courted by one of the major state schools with 50,000 plus undergrads, R1 research designation, to become a major gift officer. So spent several years doing that before taking a role back up in Vermont. And now I've been doing major gifts in total for about 8 years, and 3 years at my current institution.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's interesting. So you've had quite the career. You've been a lot of different places. Certainly experienced a lot of different things in terms of management, training, those sorts of things. We were messaging earlier, and I know you've got some strong feelings about professional development, how it's done in our profession. Over your 15 years or so, what have you seen and learned around fundraising training that you've liked? What have you seen that hasn't worked so well?
Yeah, so like I said, initially, it's not many of us. And I mean, I know University of Indiana now has a professional philanthropy school. Training is becoming more formalized when it comes to those that might want to set out into this field. But by and large, I believe a lot of us either learn on the job, by trial and error, or what I've seen a lot is that, the trainings come about as a one-to-many situation where, either the entire foundation or the entire advancement team is being trained on best practices or tactics to use when it comes to the broad way we fundraise. And I found that usually includes, a lot of the operations folks that, obviously behind the scenes make what I do possible. I'm not going to downplay the value of having a great research team or a great operations team. But when it comes to training, I think the frontline fundraisers have it's a different focus altogether. So at multiple places I've been, it comes down to there's been a lot of, teaching, talking to the individuals who are trying to learn, as opposed to, I think we can take a lot from industry where it comes to coaching may have incredible value to the, nonprofit and higher education fundraising fields. There's just something specific about that regular check-in, that regular level of accountability. And, I'm also not going to downplay the value that some of my supervisors and managers have had on my ability to grow and to learn and to, become better at what I do. I've been lucky to have some incredible superiors who, have made time to have regular coaching check-ins, to be able to bounce ideas off of, to be open and transparent about challenges I'm coming up against. But I think there's a couple issues that come up in that. One, that is your supervisor. So there's only a certain level of, vulnerability you're going to be comfortable giving to say,
Yeah.
well, listen, I know I told you that $1 million gift was going to close, but I'm feeling a little hesitant about it. And, maybe it won't this year because, we're driven by metrics and our quantitative assessments. That's the person who's going to give you your review. That's the person who's going to say, well, you fell short and I understand why, but still you didn't hit your marks. So I just feel like, it works really well in the business world. There's tons of executive coaches out there. It's been a mainstay for the professional development that happens in other industries for many years. And I just feel like it's an area that nonprofits and higher ed fundraising could really benefit from. Is more of that regularity of having someone who's, you know, has no skin in the game when it comes to when your fiscal year closes or what your goals are, other than to see you succeed and to try to encourage you to remain donor centric and to focus on what the true goal is, which is to, you know, connect with donors, build relationships, and find the right purpose and the right timing for them to make their gift.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As a fundraising coach, I think your comments are dead on. I mean, I think sometimes we'll have leaders supervising us that, you know, they've got kind of a vested interest in us hitting a certain number, and it doesn't necessarily align with what's real in terms of what's in our prospect portfolios. And that's when you get numbers slid across the table at you, right?
And I mean,
Uh,
for all the right purposes, you know,
mhm.
the when the end goal is to, you know, push the fundraisers to, you know, go out there and encourage someone to stretch, encourage someone to give at a level we know is possible, but might be, you know, a little uncomfortable to talk about. You know, I think the same needs to be said for the fundraiser themselves. That, you know, if even if this is the realistic amount, can we be doing a little better? Can we push forward a little bit further? So, yeah, I agree though.
You know, in my days as a supervisor of chief development officers, I guess I didn't realize I was doing it, but I always have taken kind of a coaching approach to leadership, and so oftentimes I'd find myself having conversations uh, with my team, trying to understand specifically, you know, how did we end up at this specific amount? You know, why is this a $250,000 ask? Why is it not 100,000? Why is it not, you know, 2.5 million? Where did this come from? And there have been a number of times where just by asking the right questions, we were able to identify opportunities for significant increases in the ask, simply because there were some assumptions I think that the development officer made that, you know, truthfully might have been better for the organization in the short term and maybe for their own stats in the short term, but was not better for the organization or the donor for that matter over the long term. You know, that is, you know, a scenario where someone's asking for, because they know they can get a $250,000 gift this year. But if you put in the work to build the vision, to develop the relationship a little further, you know, well, now we're talking about $1 million gift.
Yeah.
But it might go past the end of fiscal year to get there. But at least on the teams that I've led, that was always okay. You know, we don't want to sacrifice the long term for the short term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to that point, there's a value that I've always found, and it's the way I like to approach conversations with donors in focusing in on impact versus dollars. And I think you can accomplish both if you go about it that way. Because if you're
Mm-hmm.
sharing the priorities, you're sharing the right vision for the future, you know, an immediate conversation about the impact they want to have does not exclude you from having a long-term conversation. Let's say it's scholarship. Let's say it's affordability for students to, you know, obtain their degrees. You know, if you're talking, instead of saying, well, would you be open to a $250,000 gift because that'll allow us to, you know, you know, meet some goals when it comes to student affordability. You don't even put that number out there. You say, well, you know, I want to know from you, what level of an impact do you want to be having? Would it be 5 students? Would it be 10 students? You know, what do you see as most fulfilling to your goals as someone who's going to support the organization? And keyed off of that, you can supply the information that provides what that giving level might look like. So right now it might be, well, you know, starting with, you know, 3 students sounds pretty good. Oh, well, you know, that will be around 250. Could you see yourself in the next few years, you know, doing twice that number of students if you're feeling fulfilled with the experience of learning about them, you know, finding out the true impact you're having on the people at the end of this process, so that that $1 million gift is still in play just a few years down the road.
That's a great observation. Tom Dauber here for Abundant Vision Philanthropic Consulting. Fundraising can be hard work, and it can be hard to mentally get into the place you need to be in order to see new opportunities. Everyone struggles with it. We are like the fish in the fishbowl who just can't see the water they're swimming in. That's when having outside expertise comes in handy. For 25 years, I've been helping nonprofits analyze their challenges, discover new ways forward, and develop clear plans that lead to greater fundraising revenues. Now I am available to help your organization develop the abundant vision it needs to inspire new levels of philanthropy at your nonprofit as well. Check out abundantvision.net to start your journey toward greater fundraising success today. Now, back to the show. In terms of advice, because you've been doing this a while, Max, what's one piece of advice you wish someone gave you in your early career as a fundraiser?
I love that question. And it's something that it was early in my career that I unknowingly stumbled upon this piece of information, this advice. And it was when I was overseeing a phone-a-thon program, and I heard a student who, got someone on the phone, presumably got a no, and then immediately started saying, "Oh my, I'm so sorry. Yeah, understood. That's okay. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Good night." And I got interested, and I drew them off to the side and said, "Oh, well, was that a wrong number? I heard you apologize a bunch of times." And they said, "Oh no, the right person just didn't want to make a gift." And so the piece of advice that I gave them, and the piece of advice I think I would give anyone, has to do with mindset when you're going into the fundraising world, is, ground yourself in the good and positive work that you're doing. There really shouldn't be apologies made. Now, there are obviously exceptions for, if you do something wrong, yes, apologize. But in general, I encourage everyone to make no apologies for the work that we're doing if you believe in the end result of the cause that you're supporting. And that translates into a bunch of different areas. I think it translates into, valuing yourself and the work you're doing. I had a recent visit where someone referred to fundraisers as professional pickpockets, and it's that sort of mentality from the outside that you can't allow into your own mindset regarding what you do. We're not out there robbing from folks to do things. We're inviting an opportunity to have a real impact and make a real difference in some major causes throughout the world. So it goes to that. It goes to how you consider yourself. It also goes to how you value your time, because I think particularly in major gifts, we're working with a lot of people of affluence. Perhaps some of the folks that we're working with have, mighty titles, they're C-suite executives, their time is, incredibly short and valuable. But so is ours, because any time that we're spending with someone needs to be valuable, because it's not time we're spending with someone else who might have a significant impact on the causes that we're supporting. So I would encourage anyone, the piece of advice that I put out there is look at what you're doing, look at the good you're bringing to this world, look at the change. A great leader that I've had the benefit of working under has said, we're changing and saving lives with what we do. And I think that's absolutely accurate and goes to the value of what fundraising is. It's not anything dirty or slimy. It's something that's really great and really valuable to this world.
That's a great piece of advice. I had a boss early on, and she would always talk about what a privilege it was for her to be involved with something that was shaping the future of the world, by training students in higher ed and making a difference. And it was hard for anyone to disagree, because many of the people she was meeting with, they were alumni themselves. And so I think when you frame the conversation just from the very start, even without soliciting, you're just talking about what you do and how great it is and what a difference it makes. It just paves the way for much better conversations.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd love to hear some stories from you, Max. You've referenced some of the folks that you've worked with impressive titles. Tell me your best discovery, qualification, or even disqualification story.
Okay, so I'm going to go into a realm that's a little different than all of those, which was a re-qualification
Mm.
conversation. And I'll bring this one up because I always one of the things that I try to keep at the forefront of my mind whenever I'm doing anything is that assumptions are a killer. You can't assume anything without an open level of communication, without
Mm.
hearing it directly from the person that you're working with. And this situation came about because I had entered a new organization. I had a new group of alumni that I was working with, one of which had a planned gift with the organization. But when I looked through, some information on visits, they kind of had trailed off a few years prior to my coming on board. And so I inquired from some folks who had been there, why is that? This person looks like they're a major supporter. Why have we stopped talking to them about the impact that they're having? And it wasn't just a planned gift. There was a current use gift that funded a speaker conference, but it just seemed like no one from the foundation was talking with him. And I came to find out that he had had a health diagnosis that was, very severe, potentially terminal. And the decision that a predecessor had made was, let's give him some space. This is obviously a major
Mm.
life change that's taking place. You know, we don't want to be there talking about money and talking about giving when he's just had this terrible piece of news. And, I understood that. And, I even subscribed to it. I said, okay, I don't know the relationship. I wasn't there. I can only glean so much from notes. Let's give him the space that, they thought was a good idea. Now, luckily, a campus partner, one of the faculty members, happened to run into him at a conference for, a shared area of interest, and came to find out that he was very off put by the fact that no one was talking to him.
Mm.
The assumption made on our side was give him space. The assumption on his side was, well, they seem to be some fair weather friends there. As soon as something goes poorly in my world, they don't want to talk to me anymore. So, I took that information and, immediately got on the phone with that individual, you know, shared that I was the new person, really wanted to set up time to talk to them, appreciated what they were doing for the university. We sat down and had a really frank conversation over lunch about, just what the situation was, the miscommunication that must have happened, you know, my sincere apologies on behalf of everyone. And he was understanding about it. And the end result was that the the planned gift that he had with us was an insurance policy that he was going to let lapse. He had basically said, I'm out. They don't care about me. This is going to go
Mm.
away. He straight up said, I didn't even plan on telling you guys this. It's just no one's talking to me. I'm not going to talk to you. And so by the end of lunch, he was like, you know, I get what happened. I understand it was, all the best intentions just went sideways. My planned gift to the university is still going to be fine. I appreciate you clearing the air. And, we ended up having a really good relationship for the entire time I was there. And he stayed connected to the university for many years to come. So it's not assuming, based on what you think someone is going to feel or know. And I think that translates just into so many different areas. Like that's an extreme example, but I would encourage that when things aren't even going great, not the way to be expected, share that with your donors to keep open communication, because that's key.
That's a really great example, Max. I can think of times when I've had donors that were really close to my organization, but like you're talking about, are going through significant, like life threatening sorts of health issues, and in some cases they've been the ones that have kind of dropped off the face of the earth, and you don't know what's going on. But I'll tell you, just a note reminding them that we're thinking about them, especially if you can get that from your executive director or your dean, can mean the world without it feeling like, oh, I'm here to solicit you when you're having a tough time. Because you're right, these donors want a relationship. They want to feel supported. I had this one donor, and first it was his health, then his house caught on fire. It was just one thing after another for this poor individual. But I just kept checking in with him, and I'd report back to my dean, and the dean would shoot him a text here or there. It's so much better to be thoughtful about touching base in unobtrusive ways than it is to just cut off all communication. There may be a time for that, but it's hardly ever necessary because a note, a card, any one of those things can maintain that contact. I mean, sometimes I would even I had a donor when I was at the dental school, and this dentist was really into Catholic education, private education, high school stuff. And I found a great article that just happened to pop up. And I had just seen him, so I'm not going to send it to him immediately. I tacked it to my cubicle wall with a note to send it to him in 4 months, but just to maintain that contact, to remind him who I was and that I was thinking about him and that he was somebody that was important to the school. Makes a huge difference, Max.
It does.
That's a great story.
And I love that, folks tend to say, oh, well, you ask people for money. Isn't that so hard? Isn't that a difficult thing to do? And my response is always the same, which is, it is such a low percentage of my time when I've actually been in the process of asking someone for money. The rest of it is that relationship building, is the check-ins, is a lot of stuff that's unrelated to a solicitation that just makes a world of difference. Yeah.
I've heard one person say that really you're only soliciting about 10% of the time. And, might be a little more than that, but I don't think that's a bad rule of thumb. That's all the time we have today. But be sure to tune in next week to hear the next part of this exciting conversation. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider. I'm your host, Tom Dauber. Thank you for joining me as we journey together towards major gift mastery on the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast.